Hello and welcome back, and today we're doing another PS5 test, and today is the turn, finally, of the TeamGroup T-Force Cardea A440. This is an SSD that was released earlier in 2020, and it is one that you guys have been demanding for a while, and I finally got it here on the channel. Now, for those that aren't aware, if we flick over to the web page here, we can see that there are a few things about this SSD that are worth talking about. First and foremost, it arrives at a very good price point. Secondly, it has some great architecture there. If we have a look at the specifications, for example, the performance benchmarks we're looking at here, we're looking at the 1 TB drive, I should say. That 1 TB drive has got a great little 7,000 megabytes per second sequential read, and between 5,500 and 6,900 megabytes per second sequential write across the 1 and 2 TBs. The other thing worth bearing in mind, of course, is this SSD arrives with two different thermal kind of dissipation options. You've got that larger heatsink there on the bottom, which is a large kind of standard class one that does just about fit inside the PS5 slot. And of course you have the graphene heat panel, which is a very thin metallic strip that adhesively sticks to the SSD, and from there dissipates heat from those main chips. Now, in order for the spirit of fairness, because I know a number of you are slightly concerned about larger heat sinks in the PS5 environment, I'm looking at utilizing that heat shield, that smaller heat shield there, the graphene heat shield there. That is what we're going to be utilizing in today's video. So I'm around about 70, maybe 75 centimeters away from the PS5. Consequently, if heating does start becoming a problem, if this graphene heatsink isn't as good as they say it will be, you'll start hearing the PS5 fans. I've had this running up and running for about 15 minutes. I've not heard anything yet, but then we've not done anything too aggressive with the system yet. So let's flick over back to the PS5 benchmark and get ourselves a benchmark on this SSD. So again, this is different to the PC benchmark. This is a Phison E18 controller SSD, and that is a great benchmark there. 6,557 megabytes per second. Don't worry about that noise in the background. That is the disc for one of the games that we're going to be playing in just a moment. We're going to be bench testing 4 games today. Let's get this up and running. These 4 games that we're looking at here are part of 8 that we're going to be transferring over that make up around 400 gigabytes. And before we even play our first game, what we want to do is transfer over those 8 games over to the internal M.2 SSD slot, that TeamGroup T-Force Cardea, and we're going to see how they run. So let's go straight into it. As you can see there, there's save data corruption there. That's my own fault for moving games around in between the tests. You can largely ignore all of that. But for now, if we head over to the M.2 SSD, you can see 1 terabyte there. If we go onto the console storage there, we can see that we're already utilizing quite a lot of data space as it is. What we're going to be moving over, let's select them here. We're going to be moving over a bunch of games here. So the video coming in about a week's time is going to have the Marvel Spider-Man Remastered, Ghost of Cinema, Rocket League and Last of Us Part 2 tests, made up of about 7 to 8 tests there. But today we're looking at Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Deathloop, Lego Worlds and Miles Morales. That's the Marvel Spider-Man PS5 game. We're going to transfer these games over. It's 437 gigabytes of data being transferred over to the M.2 SSD. So let's action that now. Now, it's worth remembering that we aren't looking at how long it's going to take to transfer the data over to the internal, from the internal PS5 SSD and onto this M.2. A number of you might be wondering why. Surely that's the best, the most optimal time to test the write performance of this SSD. Well, what we've noticed throughout many, many tests conducted over the last 5 to 6 months is that when games are being transferred over internally in the system, either to or from the internal PS5 SSD onto an M.2 SSD expansion like the T-Force SSD today, there's a certain degree of compression and either encryption or unpacking or repacking of these files, whether it's for data security and to stop people with piracy getting access to the games and running them in a tailored fashion, or whether it's because the PS5 compresses games to move them around and compresses a lot of those assets to create that faster compressed internal throughput that can get close to 8 to 9 gigabytes per second, at least going by Sony's conference and big reveals at launch. Nevertheless, all of those different factors, whatever they are, have led to the movement of data between media formats in the PS5 having artificial slowdown. That is slowdown that is not caused by the drive itself, not being caused by any of the SSDs inside. So we're not measuring this because we've done this same transfer many times previously, and every single time it takes roughly the same amount of time with no difference, depending on whether we use super slow SSDs like QLC NAND SSDs like the ADATA Gamix S50 Lite, or super fast SSDs like the FireCuda 530. So regardless, what we're going to do now is fast forward to the completion of the movement of these games, and then we're going to crack on with our first game, Spider-Man Miles Morales. Right, so the games have been transferred over. If we make our way onto the M.2 SSD, we can see all 8 of those games, 4 that we're going to be testing today. So they're all on there, all transferred over. So the next thing we want to do is make our way onto the list of games here. And the first game we're going to be playing is Spider-Man Miles Morales. In the majority of cases, I'm going to be fast forwarding to the title screen, but in the case of this game, I'm going to let it play from the beginning just to give you a little bit of a breakdown about why we're performing the test that we do. So first and foremost, we are not looking at how long these games take to load to the title screen. One, these developer logos do not use that much storage capabilities or hardware to load up. These are artificially delayed, so it doesn't matter if we compare against the internal SSD or not, they're going to take the same amount of time, so we're not bothering to count them. What we're looking at is how quickly we can get the game to load into the world from the title screen, which is way more important, and we're going to be comparing the Cardea A440 SSD from TeamGroup against the internal PS5 SSD from here. And again, when we're in the game, we're going to be looking at several things. First and foremost, we're going to be looking at how quickly it loads the world. Secondly, is there any drops in frame rate? We're going to be utilizing the 30 frames per second full graphic quality mode because we want the NVMe to struggle, to be forced to struggle, I should say, not the internal PS5 CPU and GPU. If we are on 60 frames, it would tax the CPU GPU more. So what we want to do is start making our way into the game. Now remember to look out for texture swaps as well as we make our way around the world, and things that are far away get closer, and we make a point of moving between them as quickly as we can to see if the SSD is still supplying all of that data as quickly as possible as the CPU GPU requires it. But for now, let's go in 3, 2, 1. This should be a very fast load there, and we want to hit the ground running immediately and move into the world. Remember, what we're looking to do right now is just to tax as much as we can. So when I'm moving up, if I have the camera angled like that, what I want you guys to be looking at is what's beneath me. And of course, I'm talking about the TeamGroup SSD. I'm only playing that right now, but I need you to look at both of them. But as you can see, how things are introduced in the edges of the screen are the only way you'll ever get to see how things are introduced, because the middle of the screen obviously always becomes a priority, and as we get high up, the necessity of things like cars and people aren't needed. So the system will remove those assets in order to get the game running as fast as possible and free up those resources for other things. But as we move up, we're seeing no drop there. The textures are going just as well as I'd like to see them. If we make our way up this building, let's angle that camera down as we go. And again, you might be able to see some assets popping out around the edges as we move up. And again, remember, what we want to do now is quickly jump down and head down to the ground level to force the system to reintroduce assets as quickly as it can, which is what we did. And there we go. And to me, that's running absolutely great. The swapping between the textures, the graphics, the frame rate, the lighting effects, everything is running the way I'd like to see it. So let's move on to our second test, where we're going to move to the lowermost point of the map, and what we want to do is fast travel, and then from there get the system to load up new assets and then move through those as quickly as possible. So let's go in 3, 2, 1. Lovely and quick. We're just going to move straight into the world as fast as we can. We're not going to give the console any time to breathe, because again, we want to make sure that this is running optimally. So again, we're going to repeat what we did earlier on. We're going to move nice and high. We found a nice big new building to run up. Again, we've got those reflections. We're moving up. We're seeing some of those textures get removed quite easily. So again, we want to go down and force the game to reintroduce as many textures without us noticing as possible. But again, that's seemingly running fine for me there. We're still seeing all of those lovely effects that I would expect. And ultimately, I'm quite pleased with what we've seen so far. Again, I'd say right now, this is one of those games that, is one of the earlier, kind of pushes of the PS5 hardware. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, as long as you're running a Phison controller SSD and some, non-QLC NAND, I've not seen this game struggle or show any kind of limitations. It's only been on the QLC NAND SSDs where this game has proven to push some of the weaker SSDs to, show off their vulnerabilities. But for now, let's move on to our next game, which is, of course, Lego Worlds. So, we're making our way into Lego Worlds here. Originally for the PS4, this is a game that's still playable on PS5. It runs very well on like a PS4 Pro or whatever. It's actually a surprisingly graphically intensive game for a number of reasons that I'm going to talk about during the loading screen. Now, for those that aren't aware, this game is kind of like a cross between Minecraft and No Man's Sky. And dare I say it, of all the Lego games I've ever played, this has to be one of the most advanced, yet one of the most massively overlooked. And I know you don't come to this channel for gaming reviews, but trust me, if you get a chance, do play this game. It's fantastically unique. And it really puts, other Lego games which are considerably more linear, absolutely to shame. So what we're going to be doing here is creating a custom world. We're going to create a custom world from scratch. We're going to make it lovely and big. We're going to fill it with every single possible asset we can, or at least the ones that we're able to pull in randomly. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and explore that world and make sure that the NVMe that we're utilizing, that TeamGroup T-Force Cardea A440, does the job. So we're going to create that custom world from scratch. It's going to be the largest possible world we can get. And we're going to use every single biome available to us. Biomes are effectively mini worlds or districts or counties, whatever you want to call them that. Each of them very, very different. All of them with their own unique values. And what we're doing here is creating a random world that's going to require all of them to be readily available. So what we're going to do is load into the world now in 3, 2, 1. As we make our way in, it's worth highlighting about the difference between sequential data and slightly more I/O data. So sequential data is your big data, your big chunks and lumps of data, but your mini stuff, your small textures, your tiny little edges, basically when it comes to the data, the files that are in kilobits, not megabytes, these are the ones that are the one which will show off any high IOPT values on an SSD, more or less. And as we load into the world here, which is a combination of in-game assets and pre-rendered stuff, we're able to make our way into this world quite directly and then see how that felt quite quick for that SSD. But the first thing we're going to do is get ourselves an air vehicle from here, and then that air vehicle we're going to use to explore the world as quickly as possible. Let's bring the camera in a little bit. We're going to just go as quick as we can. Normally we would go for an air vehicle, but you know what? Just this once, let's go for a landmass vehicle, because I think that might be a better way to show off a lot of the world assets, to stop the game from swapping out anything that, may or may not be hidden when we're going through the sky. So let's get ourselves a good vehicle there and jump straight in. Let's double check how the game is handling the internal visuals. So again, it's loaded in those textures exactly how I'd like to see it. Let's go ahead and start moving our way through the level. Again, we'll go as quick as we can as we make our way through. Again, the vehicle speed is largely the same regardless whether you go air or not. But what we're looking at here is just seeing how quickly it loads into the assets. Now, don't worry too much about the way the distance stuff seemingly is starting to kind of appear as we drive. Don't worry, that's because this game uses a kind of load grid system around us. So if you look in the distance, you can see that stuff is being introduced granularly in a kind of surrounding circle around the player. So don't worry, that's all perfectly normal. What we're here to do is to figure out how well it's swapping out those close and far away textures as we go. So again, as we keep moving forward as quickly as we can, hopefully that water won't pose a problem. And again, moving forward, I'm seeing nothing here that I'd be concerned with. We've brought the camera out as far as we can. So let's go ahead and have a little look around at the world that we've got so far. Again, we can go ahead, double check that the textures are running fine, even up nice and close. Moving nice and fast here, we can see as we go that seemingly running as well as we'd like them to be. I mean, again, the last thing we'll do before we leave this game is we're going to quickly test some of the world asset builds. So again, when the game introduces the ability to build larger structures, what we can do is just quickly build some massive structures for us to explore. So let's stick a bank there, absolutely out of nowhere. And you know what? Let's tax it further still. Let's create a corner deli there just for the hell of it. And create another brand new structure right there in the water, just for the sheer hell of it. So it's going to keep building those. Let's go into the inside view and double check that the texture swaps are all running fine internally. So again, it's introduced AI characters as well when you create these areas, but for now, running absolutely fine. We can go nice and high up. Everything's looking fine. All the shapes and the colors and the lighting effects are all running exactly how I'd like to see them. And again, overall, quite pleased with what we're seeing here. Overall, quite happy. It's created those buildings. All the textures that we put down have been introduced with the speed that I'd like to see them. Everything is the way I'd like it to be. And ultimately, I'd say this game has absolutely smashed loading this game and all the different things that we wanted it to do as much as we would like it to do. But for now, let's make our way onto our third game, which is Deathloop. Okay, so we're making our way into this game. Now, bear in mind, once again, not only are we not looking at the world loading, because this game uses internet-based connectivity at Bethesda.net, consequently, that means that there's any number of artificial delays that can prevent us seeing how quickly the game loads. So we're only looking at inside loading, but also, once we load from this title screen and into the world, there may be a slightly different animation or a slightly different kind of on-screen set that happens. So we're not including the load-in from this screen into the world load. We only count when we see the loading screen on this game. So again, depending on how different SSDs we've tested, all we've ever looked at is, you'll see in a moment, when we see the loading bar. In this game, we're looking at the following. We're looking at the game maintaining that 60 frames per second performance benchmark there. And again, the GPU, CPU are obviously a big part of that, but we're going to be running through the game, forcing it to introduce high-res assets as quickly as possible. So the other thing we're looking at is trying to get as up close and personal with the glory kills and more with all of the enemies, because the game does, like a lot of games that use up close and personal kind of pre-designed kill animations, they swap the textures out. So they go for low to mid textures as you're closing in on an enemy, and if you perform a close-knit kill, then it immediately swaps into the high textures as well. It keeps them in the cache, but still nonetheless the SSD is a big part of that. But for now, let's load in 3, 2, 1. So we count from there. When we see that loading screen now, we compare it against the internal PS5 SSD, of course. And as we make our way into the world lovely and quickly, the idea is we want to move as forward as fast as possible, because the game will make a point of disguising a lot of hidden loading there between forced walking segments. We're not going to allow that. What we want is to make our way around the map as quickly as possible and see how it compares in performance and in texture swaps to the internal PS5 SSD. So the first one we're going to look at is those texture swaps. Let's force the system to bring in those enemies lovely and close. So again, we're going to have a lot of enemies suddenly pull in very quickly here, and all we're looking at right now is those up close and personal textures, as the game is forcing all of these to happen in real time. So again, even when we die, we're not going to slow down. We get to die twice in this game, so we can immediately fast forward into the world to carry on where we left off, to stop that being any kind of respite for the NVMe or the internal PS5 system. Again, we're trying to get as many close-up kills as possible. So again, we'll keep moving forward. All running fine there. So what we'll do is we'll switch onto the gun, quickly take out a horrible camera there, and then move into the next segment where there'll be more enemies, more textures, and basically keep pushing things forward as quick as we can. So yep, things are running as fast as I'd like to see them run. My health is deteriorating from being shot at from about a dozen different angles. We're going to keep moving forward. We're seeing no speed drops, no kind of sign of things giving up or the NVMe not delivering in the speed that this game requires. And again, we're killing, we've died, but it doesn't matter. We're just going to immediately start up again and move forward through that world with no real worry about what's going on there. But I think for now, I'd call this a success. And I think for now, we can go ahead, start making our way onto our next game, and our final game indeed, which is Call of Duty Warzone. Right, so here we are on Warzone. Before we start, it is worth highlighting that I include Call of Duty Warzone as, even though it's a couple of years old now, let's be realistic, it's still an enormously popular Battle Royale game. And even though it was originally out for the previous generation, it has been upscaled significantly for PS5 with a huge gamer base still in existence who are going to wonder whether this SSD from TeamGroup is still going to support them on their gaming, personally or professionally. The problem is that this is a game that requires internet connectivity. You cannot disconnect your internet service provider from the console when gaming, otherwise you can't connect to Warzone, and that includes for offline play. So even though we're going to be running a test utilizing the Battle Royale mode in practice, and therefore utilizing the game with AI only, the problem lies in that when we're doing that, there's still internet connectivity, both in the startup of the game and in certain areas of it. So we can't remove that entirely. So even though in this test, we are looking at how quickly it loads into the world map, it is worth remembering that it's not strictly accurate to compare against the internal PS5 SSD. As time and again, with all the SSDs we've tested, this game has loaded at wildly different rates, sometimes with as much as 3 to 4 seconds difference, regardless of the SSD's power or performance. So what we're looking at here is a little bit of how quickly it loads into the game, but predominantly we are looking at the speed at which the game runs, the swapping of textures, and when we go to high points and low points indeed inside certain structures, how well the game deals with the swapping of those textures. So let's kick straight in now in 3, 2, 1. Now remember, as mentioned while going through these loading screens as you see here on screen, the game is going to go through 3 different loading phases. There's the first one we're looking at here, which is like the standard sequential chunky data. Then we're going to go into a pre-rendered FMV of a plane going through the clouds, as you see there. Again, not using in-game assets, but it can jutter because right now the game is loading in-game assets, non-FMV. If you play this on the PC, you'll know that if you change your recommended settings, you'll know that what you're watching on the screen right this second does change. So it is clearly using rendered assets every time. And now it's loading in the game world. What you're seeing here around us is the in-game world being loaded in, but in low textures. And a lot of the ground stuff in that grey area just towards the top there, if we open the map there in the circle, that is where the game is genuinely being loaded in, with the rest of the surrounding environment being low textures that if you got up close would have about 4 pixels to share amongst them. So what we're going to be doing shortly is jumping in, and when we jump into the world here, remember, what we're trying to do here is see how things run and how good the game runs while it's pulling all those assets from the game. What we're looking for is to jump into a vehicle. Again, we've got one right here. And from this vehicle, we're going to drive around the map as quickly as we can. And that'll allow us to play the game slightly unconventionally, but also force the game to have to keep up with what we're doing here. So we're going to move nice and fast around the areas of the map. Again, we're surrounded by AI, so no human players here. Again, if we kill anyone, then, you know, that's a bonus, but we're not playing this to kill people right now. All we're caring about right now is how quickly this game runs with what we're doing. So all we're doing is moving around the map as quickly as possible, and then from there making sure that the game still loads in all the assets and maintains that frame rate for us there. The camera control on this vehicle is a little bit too difficult here. It's not moving very well, so I have to keep moving it manually. But as we move around the map as fast as possible, I'm seeing no slowdown here around the whole area of the map as we buzz around it as quickly as possible. Again, no difficulties, no problems here that I'm seeing. The lighting effects, the reflection effects on that water were still fine. The speed at which we're playing is still fine. Again, absolutely great stuff there. So I'm going to move into an inside area shortly. So let's jump out of the vehicle. And for now, let's move into an inside area just to double check that that's all loading in fine. Let's open up a door there. Have a little look. Things seemingly running fine there. We're not going to bother killing anyone. So if you are someone that loves this game, is going to get angry at me for not killing anyone, then I'm sorry. But there you go. That's not what we're looking at here. What we're trying to do is get as high as possible. And then from there, have a little look around the surrounding area of the map just to double check that everything's loading in right and that the textures aren't being kind of poorly swapped out while we're running through things. But again, that still looks fine to me. So let's go ahead and carry on running. Keep moving up to this area here. And again, we're going to make our way into an inside area of the map here. I believe this is the one that's got a couple of vehicles and stuff knocking around. So again, all of that nice close-up stuff running absolutely fine. The lighting effects running exactly as good as I'd like to see them. Yep, lovely stuff there. So let's go ahead and keep moving. But yeah, overall, quite happy with the performance of this game right now. And I think I'm going to wrap things up because I think this game has proven itself to be running absolutely fine. We've not heard the fans spinning up, which is great. The only time we've heard the PS5 is when the games have required the disk to verify their identity. But don't worry, all of that data was moved over. It doesn't use any of the disk data, so there's no bottleneck. But let's head back onto the XMB menu there and sort of summarize everything we've seen today. Because again, we've always known this SSD was going to run. This has been one of the SSDs you guys have been requesting in my PS5 test lineup for quite a while. And although they have released a PlayStation 5 special version known as the Special Pro, this is still the more affordable option, which still runs beautifully in PS5 from what I've seen. Now, do stay tuned for the next video where we're going to be looking at a few games there that there's a big breakdown of a lot of IOPS data as well as probably a closer look at how this SSD runs in more extensive load segments in the next video. The other thing I will touch on is I'm going to be revisiting the subject of heatsink temperatures very, very soon, because there's been a lot more in the last 3 or 4 months, a lot more heatsinks and cooling systems released for the PS5. And I want to see how well they will stack up, are they unnecessary, and also compare them, of course, against that thermal plate that's being featured there on this SSD and that heat shield, that graphene heat shield. But do stay tuned for the next video in this series. If you found this video helpful or enjoyed it, then do click like. It genuinely helps the channel and also helps me make sure that every video is better than the last. Do click subscribe if you want to know when the next video in this series comes out. Of course, click the bell to be notified too, but subscription will allow you to get to know when all of the big SSD and PS5 guides drop throughout the year. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next video.